She learned early that silence inside a marriage could be louder than screaming arguments. Every morning began with routine movements that felt empty, rehearsed, and painfully familiar. Her husband spoke only when necessary, his voice flat, distant, and emotionally unreachable. He never asked how she felt, never noticed the weight she carried behind tired eyes. At the breakfast table, his presence felt colder than his absence ever could. She tried small gestures of connection, but they always dissolved into uncomfortable quiet. Love slowly became effort, and effort slowly turned into quiet resignation. She convinced herself that endurance was strength, even as her heart weakened daily. The house stood full of people, yet loneliness echoed in every hallway. She wondered when her life had turned into something she merely survived. Her children felt the distance before they ever understood its meaning. The oldest learned anger early, watching his father dismiss emotions as unnecessary weaknesses. He responded with defiance, sharp words, and a constant need to challenge authority. The middle child learned invisibility, speaking less each year, retreating further into himself. He watched conflict silently, believing his silence might somehow keep peace alive. The youngest learned desperation, chasing approval with perfect behavior and forced smiles. Each boy reacted differently, yet all carried the same wound of emotional neglect. Their home taught them lessons no child should have to learn alone. She saw the damage forming slowly, like cracks spreading beneath untouched walls. And she blamed herself for not stopping it sooner. She tried to compensate with love, patience, and endless emotional availability. She listened when no one else did, comforted tears, and absorbed unspoken pain. But love alone could not replace what absence had already taken away. Her husband remained unchanged, unmoved, untouched by the consequences of his detachment. He believed providing financially excused every emotional debt he refused to pay. Conversations turned into monologues, and pleas dissolved into frustrated silence. Each attempt to confront him ended with emotional dismissal or cold indifference. She felt herself shrinking, adapting, bending to preserve a fragile illusion of family. Yet inside, fear grew stronger as she watched her sons drifting further away. Something irreversible was already beginning, and she could feel it. At night, she lay awake, replaying moments she wished she could rewrite. She imagined different choices, different words, different courage she had not yet found. Her heart ached not only for herself, but for the futures forming before her eyes. She sensed that love without boundaries was quietly destroying everything she tried to protect. The realization arrived slowly, heavy, and impossible to ignore any longer. This was not just a difficult phase or temporary emotional distance. This was a pattern, deeply rooted, silently shaping her children's destinies. She feared the day she would look back and realize she waited too long. The weight of responsibility pressed harder with every passing day, and deep down, she knew something had to change. The tension inside the house became something everyone learned to navigate carefully. Words were chosen with caution, movements softened, emotions hidden to avoid confrontation. Her husband's presence dictated the atmosphere without him ever raising his voice. Silence became a rule, and discomfort became routine within those walls. She watched her sons adjust their behavior based on his moods and indifference. Laughter felt inappropriate, vulnerability felt unsafe, and honesty felt risky. The family learned to live around him instead of with him. Each day reinforced the same lesson. Emotional needs were an inconvenience. She felt guilt watching her children internalize that belief, and she felt powerless to stop it completely. The oldest son began acting out more aggressively as years passed. School calls became frequent, reports filled with words like disruptive and hostile. He carried anger like armor, using it to protect a fragile sense of self. She recognized his rage as borrowed pain, inherited from emotional abandonment. When she tried to discipline him, he accused her of choosing silence over escape. His words cut deeply because they carried uncomfortable truth she tried to deny. He wanted her to leave, to save them, to choose courage over endurance. But fear kept her rooted where she stood. Fear of failure, judgment, and the unknown future beyond that marriage. And that fear slowly poisoned her relationship with him. The middle son faded further into the background each passing year. Teachers described him as polite, quiet, and forgettable, never causing trouble. At home, he disappeared into books, headphones, and locked bedroom doors. She tried to reach him with questions, but he responded with practiced neutrality. He learned early that expressing feelings only created more discomfort, so he buried them carefully, layer by layer, behind forced independence. She sensed storms inside him that no one else seemed to notice. Storms made of confusion, loneliness, and quiet resentment. His silence frightened her more than her oldest son's anger ever could, because silence meant suffering without witnesses. The youngest still believed love could fix everything if he tried hard enough. He cleaned without being asked, smiled constantly, and avoided mistakes obsessively. Praise became his currency and approval his emotional oxygen. She saw exhaustion in his small shoulders far too early. He was learning to earn love instead of expecting it freely. Every failed attempt to impress his father bruised him deeply. She held him at night, promising things she was no longer sure about. Promises that tomorrow would feel warmer, safer, more loving than today. Each promise felt heavier as evidence contradicted her words, and guilt settled permanently in her chest. She stood between a husband who refused emotional responsibility and sons who suffered silently. Every choice felt wrong. Every delay felt like betrayal. She realized endurance was no longer noble, but destructive. Staying had consequences she could no longer ignore or justify. The family was breaking in different ways, yet all from the same source, and she was the only one fully aware of the damage being done. The weight of that awareness isolated her further. She felt trapped between fear and responsibility, love and regret. This pain was no longer manageable or temporary. It was only the beginning of something far worse. If this story is making you feel the pain, the betrayal, and the injustice behind every choice, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Here, every story dives deep into broken trust, hard lessons, and powerful revenge. And you don't want to miss the next fate-changing story. The first real collapse came quietly, without warning or dramatic announcement. Her oldest son stopped coming home at predictable hours, returning late and guarded. His eyes carried something new, a hardened look shaped by dangerous influences. She sensed he was searching for belonging in places that demanded destruction instead. When she confronted him, he laughed bitterly, accusing her of choosing comfort over courage. He said the house already felt broken, so consequences no longer mattered. His words echoed with pain he never learned how to express safely. She realized his anger had evolved into something far more reckless, something that could not be fixed with patience alone. And fear tightened around her chest. The middle son's withdrawal deepened into emotional disappearance. Days passed where she barely heard his voice inside the house. He avoided eye contact, skipped meals, and retreated into endless isolation. She noticed changes in his sleep, his posture, his fragile emotional state. Teachers mentioned concern, but no one seemed alarmed enough to intervene. At home, he existed like a shadow, present but unreachable. She knocked on his door nightly, unsure whether silence meant safety or danger. Every unanswered knock fueled unbearable anxiety inside her. She feared what she might find if she pushed too hard, and feared even more what would happen if she did nothing. The youngest faced his breaking point in a moment that changed him permanently. He failed publicly, something small but devastating to a child craving approval. His father's reaction was not anger, but cold dismissal and visible disappointment. That moment shattered something innocent and hopeful inside him. She watched his face collapse as he realized perfection was still not enough. From that day forward, his smiles became forced and fragile. He began apologizing for things he never caused. She held him tightly, but her arms could not undo what was done. The damage had already settled deeply into his identity, and she felt powerless watching it happen. She turned to her husband, desperate and trembling with urgency. She spoke honestly for the first time, listing the damage they were ignoring. Her voice broke as she begged him to see what was happening. He listened without emotion, without interruption, without visible concern. When she finished, he responded calmly, dismissively, and without accountability. He said children adapt, that life was hard and emotions were exaggerated. That response felt colder than silence had ever been. In that moment, something inside her collapsed completely. Hope cracked, illusions shattered, and fear transformed into despair. She realized she was standing alone against an inevitable disaster. That night, she understood staying was no longer neutral or safe. Every delay was actively shaping her children's futures for the worse. The marriage was not merely loveless, but destructive by design. She felt the weight of years pressing down all at once. Regret flooded her with paralyzing force. She had waited, endured, adapted, and excused far too long. Now the consequences were no longer abstract or distant. They were visible, immediate, and terrifyingly permanent. This was not a warning anymore. This was the beginning of the end. The consequences escalated faster than she ever imagined possible. A phone call arrived late one night, sharp and urgent, demanding immediate attention. Her oldest son had crossed a line that could not be quietly corrected. Authorities spoke in measured tones that carried permanent implications. She listened, frozen, realizing fear had finally become reality. The boy she once rocked to sleep now stood accused of something serious. His anger had found an outlet that would leave scars far beyond their home. She felt the crushing weight of knowing this path began years earlier. Years of silence, avoidance, and emotional neglect. And now there was no undo button. The middle son reached a breaking point no one else recognized in time. One afternoon, his bedroom door remained closed longer than usual. Calls went unanswered, and the silence felt different, heavier, threatening. When she finally entered, she found evidence of pain hidden too long. Nothing dramatic, nothing final, but enough to shatter her sense of safety. She realized how close she had come to losing him completely. His suffering had been invisible by design, perfected through years of restraint. She held him as he trembled, realizing love alone had not protected him. He needed intervention, structure, and decisive change, and she had failed to act soon enough. The youngest withdrew into obedience so complete it frightened her. He stopped expressing opinions, desires, or complaints entirely. He mirrored expectations flawlessly, like a child afraid to exist incorrectly. Teachers praised his behavior, unaware of the cost behind that perfection. At home, he asked permission for things that never required it before. She watched him disappear behind politeness and compliance. This was not healing. It was emotional surrender. A child learning survival through self-erasure. She recognized the same emptiness forming in all three sons, just wearing different masks. She confronted her husband again, no longer begging but demanding change. She laid everything bare, consequences unfolding in real time. He responded with frustration, accusing her of exaggeration and emotional instability. He refused counseling, denied responsibility, and blamed external influences. His refusal felt final, absolute, and unmoving. In that moment, clarity arrived without mercy or doubt. This marriage would never become a place of safety. No amount of patience could transform indifference into care. She felt something inside her shut down permanently. Hope was no longer an option. That night, exhaustion overtook her like a physical force. Her body collapsed under the weight of prolonged emotional trauma. Thoughts blurred, memories overlapped, and consciousness slipped away. She felt herself falling into darkness without resistance. There was no prayer, no farewell, no final thought. Only the overwhelming wish she had acted sooner. Regret echoed louder than fear as everything faded. She believed this was the end of her chance. That destiny had already been written in irreversible ink, and she had arrived too late to change it. If this story is making you feel the pain, the betrayal, and the injustice behind every choice, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Here, every story dives deep into broken trust, hard lessons, and powerful revenge, and you don't want to miss the next fate-changing story. She woke up with the strange certainty that something fundamental had shifted. The room felt familiar, yet subtly different in ways she could not explain. Her body felt lighter, unburdened by the exhaustion she remembered carrying. As she sat up, sounds from the house reached her ears unexpectedly. Laughter echoed faintly, untouched by tension or fear. Her heart raced as memory and reality collided violently inside her. She rushed to the doorway, afraid of what she might discover. Time itself felt unstable, fragile, and impossibly reversed. Then she saw them, younger, untouched by years of damage. And realization struck with overwhelming force. The calendar confirmed what her mind struggled to accept. Years had disappeared, erased as if they never existed. Her sons were children again, living before the fractures took root. The house still held tension, but not yet devastation. Her husband remained distant, unchanged, and emotionally unavailable. But now she recognized the pattern with absolute clarity. This was not a second chance to fix him. This was an opportunity to protect what truly mattered. She felt fear, disbelief, and determination collide within her, and she refused to waste a single moment. Her first decision was internal, quiet, and irreversible. She stopped seeking validation from a man incapable of offering it. She stopped excusing emotional absence as strength or responsibility. Instead, she began observing, planning, and setting invisible boundaries. Every interaction became intentional rather than reactive. She spoke less to him, but with firmer tone and clearer limits. She redirected her energy toward her children without apology. Love would no longer be passive or silent. It would be structured, protective, and courageous. And she felt power returning slowly. She approached each son differently, guided by memories she could not forget. With the oldest, she nurtured emotional expression before anger could harden. She listened actively, validated feelings, and encouraged healthy defiance. With the middle, she created space for safety and voice. She asked questions, waited patiently, and refused to accept emotional disappearance. With the youngest, she dismantled perfection gently and deliberately. She praised effort, not obedience, and normalized mistakes without consequences. Each small change felt monumental in its impact. She was rewriting foundations rather than correcting outcomes, and hope began rebuilding itself quietly. That night, she reflected on the weight of knowledge she carried. The future she remembered still haunted her with terrifying clarity. She understood this path would not be easy or immediate. Mistakes would still happen. Resistance would still exist. But she was no longer blind or powerless. She had seen where silence led and refused to repeat it. This time, love would be paired with action and boundaries. This time, endurance would not replace courage. The cycle would end with her, and fate would not remain unchallenged. Change did not arrive dramatically or announce itself with immediate results. It unfolded quietly through consistent decisions repeated every single day. She began restructuring routines, expectations, and emotional access within the home. Her sons noticed before they fully understood what was happening. The house felt different, safer, less unpredictable than before. She listened without rushing, corrected without humiliation, and protected without hesitation. Rules became clear, not harsh, designed to create security rather than control. She stopped minimizing their pain and started naming it openly. That alone changed how they saw themselves, and slowly, trust began to form. The oldest responded first, though not without resistance. He tested boundaries aggressively, expecting abandonment or emotional withdrawal. Instead, she remained firm, present, and unshaken by his anger. She taught him that strength did not require destruction or dominance. Conversations replaced confrontations, and guidance replaced punishment. He began channeling frustration into discipline rather than rebellion. She enrolled him in activities that rewarded structure and accountability. For the first time, he felt seen without being feared. His anger softened into guarded respect, and a new path quietly opened before him. The middle son resisted in a different way, retreating deeper at first. She refused to let silence pass as acceptable communication. She created rituals of connection that did not demand immediate vulnerability. Small routines, shared moments, and predictable presence rebuilt safety slowly. He learned that his voice would not disrupt peace or provoke rejection. When he finally spoke honestly, she listened without interruption or judgment. His words came cautiously, fragmented but genuine. She responded with patience he had never experienced before. That patience became a foundation he could stand on, and his inner world began reopening. The youngest struggled to release perfection, fearing consequences that never came. She corrected herself whenever old habits surfaced unconsciously. She praised curiosity, courage, and honesty instead of obedience. Mistakes became learning moments rather than emotional threats. He tested her promises repeatedly, waiting for disappointment. Each time, she remained consistent and reassuring. Gradually, his shoulders relaxed and laughter returned naturally. He stopped apologizing for existing imperfectly. Safety replaced fear as his emotional baseline, and childhood reclaimed space it had lost. Her husband noticed the changes, but misunderstood their source entirely. He interpreted her firmness as distance and her boundaries as disrespect. Attempts to reassert control failed where silence once succeeded. She no longer reacted to indifference or intimidation. When conflict arose, she addressed it calmly and decisively. She made it clear that emotional neglect would no longer be normalized. His confusion grew as his influence weakened. For the first time, he felt unnecessary rather than powerful, and that realization unsettled him deeply. The balance of power had shifted permanently. The results of her decisions became undeniable as years unfolded differently. Her oldest son grew into structure instead of chaos, discipline replacing rebellion. Authority no longer felt like an enemy, but a tool he could respect. He learned accountability without humiliation and confidence without aggression. Opportunities appeared where trouble once waited patiently. He chose challenges that strengthened him rather than destroyed him. Pride replaced rage as his defining emotional force. She watched him stand tall without fear or bitterness. The future that once terrified her now looked possible. And relief settled where panic once lived. The middle son transformed quietly, but with profound permanence. He began expressing thoughts without rehearsing emotional defenses. Teachers noticed curiosity where silence once dominated classrooms. He formed friendships slowly, carefully, but authentically. Trust no longer felt dangerous or conditional. He allowed himself to need others without shame. Creativity resurfaced, fueled by emotional safety rather than escape. She listened as he shared dreams he once buried deeply. Those dreams no longer felt fragile or forbidden. They felt real and achievable. The youngest reclaimed joy without earning it through obedience. His laughter filled spaces once dominated by anxious quiet. Mistakes no longer triggered fear or apology. He explored interests freely, unafraid of disappointing invisible standards. Confidence grew naturally, unforced and genuine. He learned that love did not require performance or perfection. Security became his foundation rather than approval. She saw innocence preserved instead of erased. Childhood unfolded fully this time, and guilt finally loosened its grip on her heart. Her husband, however, experienced justice differently and without comfort. The family no longer revolved around his emotional absence. His silence no longer commanded power or control. Attempts to reclaim authority were met with calm resistance. She no longer negotiated basic respect or emotional safety. Boundaries stood firm, unmovable, and consistently enforced. He realized too late that indifference carried consequences. The connection he dismissed was no longer available on demand. Loss replaced entitlement as his new reality, and accountability arrived without mercy or drama. She did not celebrate his discomfort or seek revenge. Justice did not require cruelty, only truth and consequence. She focused on protecting the life she rebuilt deliberately. The balance shifted naturally as her strength stabilized the family. She no longer needed permission to lead or protect. Her authority came from action, not confrontation. The family thrived without his emotional approval, and that reality spoke louder than any argument. He stood on the outside of the world he neglected, watching what he failed to value finally flourish. She often reflected on how close everything had come to permanent destruction. The memory of that lost future remained vivid, sharp, and deeply instructive. It reminded her why courage had replaced endurance as her guiding force. She understood now that love without boundaries was not love at all. Protection required action, clarity, and willingness to disrupt comfort. Her past self had survived, but this version finally lived. She no longer questioned her worth or instincts. The fear that once governed her decisions had lost its authority. Peace filled spaces once dominated by anxiety, and gratitude replaced regret in her daily thoughts. Her sons grew into individuals shaped by safety rather than survival. They carried strength without hardness and confidence without cruelty. Each of them understood emotions as tools, not threats. They spoke openly, challenged respectfully, and trusted deeply. Their paths diverged naturally, guided by purpose instead of rebellion. She watched them choose wisely without her constant intervention. Independence no longer frightened her because foundation had been built correctly. She saw resilience where fragility once formed. The future unfolded with promise rather than fear, and her heart rested, knowing she had changed everything that mattered. Her husband remained a distant figure, defined by choices he never revisited. He watched from the margins as the family evolved without his leadership. Regret surfaced quietly, too late to reshape outcomes already decided. She neither punished nor rescued him from that realization. Consequences belonged to him alone. She offered respect where appropriate, distance where necessary. Her life no longer revolved around explaining pain to someone unwilling to feel it. Closure did not require reconciliation or apology. It required acceptance of truth, and she had fully accepted it. The power of her journey lay not in time travel, but in awakening. Time merely removed excuses and revealed responsibility. She learned that fate bends when courage replaces fear, that cycles end when silence breaks permanently, that motherhood sometimes demands radical transformation. She did not save her family by changing the past. She saved them by refusing to repeat it. That refusal became her legacy, a life reclaimed through decisive love, and a destiny rewritten by unwavering resolve. If this story is making you feel the pain, the betrayal, and the injustice behind every choice, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Here, every story dives deep into broken trust, hard lessons, and powerful revenge. And you don't want to miss the next fate-changing story.